The sewer beneath South Philadelphia did not smell like escape. It smelled like 40 years of city's secrets, iron and standing water, and the particular damp of stone that has never once seen sunlight. Naomi Washington walked through it with her father's spice tin under her arm and a passport in her jacket that a dead woman had prepared for her 3 years before she knew she needed it. And she did not look back at the grate above them, because looking back was a habit she was in the process of breaking. Cho Yeon walked ahead with a lantern. She moved through the sewer passage the way someone moves through a space they have memorized in the dark, without hesitation, without checking her footing, without any of the tentative adjustment that comes from uncertainty. She had been down here before, many times. The lantern was not for her benefit. It was for theirs. Tae-Min walked between them and said nothing. He was doing what he had always done in rooms where the situation was larger than his preparation. He was listening, not to the water, not to the distant, muffled sound of Jun-Ho's men losing their footing on the wet fire escape above. He was listening to the specific quality of silence between the two women walking ahead of and behind him, trying to understand what it contained. It contained 30 years. It contained a border crossing in 1993 that his grandfather had declared a fatal incident and sealed from the family record. It contained Big Mike Washington standing at a crossing point in a country he had no official reason to be in, staying longer than any covert arrangement permitted, leaving behind something that could not be carried back across the line. It contained a daughter. Cho Yeon stopped at a junction in the passage where 3 corridors met. She raised the lantern and examined the ceiling, counting something. Rivets, Naomi realized, watching her. She was counting rivets in the stone above her head, using them as a map that existed nowhere except in her own memory. She turned left without announcing it and kept walking. Naomi followed. Then Tae-Min. Then the passage narrowed and the ceiling lowered, and the 3 of them moved in single file through a section of corridor so tight that Tae-Min's shoulders brushed both walls simultaneously, and Naomi thought about all the ways a person could be built for a space. How Cho Yeon moved through this particular darkness as if she had been shaped by it, the way a river is shaped by the specific geology of its bed. The corridor ended at a steel door. Not old, not rusted. A modern reinforced door set into stone, with a 3-lock system and no exterior handle. Cho Yeon reached into the inside pocket of her field jacket and produced a small leather roll of tools. She laid it open against the door frame with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this in the dark before, literally and metaphorically, and began to work. Naomi watched her hands. They were steady in a way that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with the specific calm that comes from having already survived the thing you were most afraid of. Whatever Cho Yeon had been most afraid of, she had survived it somewhere in the 7 years between the border crossing and this sewer passage, and the surviving of it had made her hands like this absolutely, permanently still. The 3rd lock released with a sound like a breath being let out. The door swung inward. Beyond it was light. Not lantern light. Not the cold blue of a phone screen. Electric light, warm and amber, coming from a series of work lamps mounted at intervals along the ceiling of a space that opened up beyond the door into something that should not have been possible, a laboratory. Fully equipped, operational, the kind of space that required years of accumulated supply runs and technical knowledge, and the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided that the work was going to be completed regardless of what the world above thought about it. Benches ran the length of both walls, covered in equipment that Tae-Min recognized from his grandfather's facilities in Seoul, and Naomi recognized from the VHS tape. The same configuration, the same spatial logic, the same handwriting on the label containers that she had seen on the ledger pages in the Jimjilbang. The handwriting was Park Soon-hee's, his grandmother's, but the labels were newer. Some of them were dated within the last 18 months. Someone had been continuing the work. Cho Yeon set the lantern down on the central bench and turned to face them both. In the electric light, she looked different than she had in the sewer. More present, more certain, occupying the space with the specific authority of someone on their own ground. My mother left detailed notes, she said. When she defected, she carried them out of the north in the lining of her jacket. 37 pages of botanical compound research that your father had given her at the crossing point, Naomi. He knew he couldn't take them back across. He knew if he was searched, they would disappear. So, he gave them to her and told her to keep them safe until someone came for them. She paused. She kept them safe for 22 years. When she died, she gave them to me, and I have spent the last 7 years finishing what they started. The silence in the laboratory was of a different quality than any silence that had preceded it in this story. It was the silence of something that had been traveling toward completion for 30 years, finally arriving at the last room. Naomi sat down on the bench stool because her legs had made the decision for her. She set the spice tin on the bench beside her. She looked at the labeled containers. She looked at the handwriting that matched the ledger. She looked at her sister, and that word was going to take time. She understood it was going to take a significant amount of time before she could use it in her mind without the slight vertigo that came with it, standing in this laboratory beneath the most heavily guarded strip of land on Earth, looking back at her with their father's eyes. "How long do we have before Jun-Ho finds a door?" Tae-Min asked. Cho Yeon looked at her watch. "He found the sewer entrance approximately 4 minutes after you dropped through the grate. He has 2 men who know these passages from the 2019 incursion attempt. They will reach this door in approximately 11 minutes. She looked at the ledger in Tae-Min's hands. "Which means we have 11 minutes to copy what we need and destroy what they can't have." "What do they need that's here?" Naomi asked. "The catalyst compound," Cho Yeon said. She moved to the far end of the bench and opened a refrigerated storage unit. Inside, in a sealed glass container the size of a jam jar, was a liquid the color of dark amber, almost the same color as the gravy her father had kept simmering for 40 years, and Naomi understood in that moment that this was not a coincidence, that Big Mike Washington had hidden the truth of what he knew and what he'd built inside the most visible possible metaphor, right there on the stove in front of everyone, for decades. The formula in the ledger is incomplete without this. My grandfather's scientists have been trying to synthesize it independently for 15 years. They cannot. The botanical source compound is extinct in South Korea and China. It only exists in one place on Earth. "Where?" Naomi said. Cho Yeon looked at her. "Your father's garden, behind a restaurant." The sound that came out of Naomi Washington in that moment was not a laugh and not a sob and not a word in any language. It was the sound of a person understanding something so large and so close that it had been invisible, the way you cannot see a wall by pressing your face against it. Behind a restaurant, the patch of garden Big Mike had kept and tended for 42 years, the one he had never let anyone else touch, the one she had always assumed was just tomatoes and herbs for the kitchen, the one the men who burned the Seoul pit down 3 hours ago had burned along with everything else. Or had they? "The garden has a root cellar," Naomi said slowly. Her voice was doing something she didn't have full control over. "My father built it when I was 7. He told me it was for storing pickles." She looked at Cho Yeon. "He told me never to go in alone." Tae-Min was already opening the ledger to the last pages, the ones written most recently, the ink still carrying a slightly different quality than the older entries. He found what he was looking for on the third-to-last page. A hand-drawn map. Small, precise, unmistakably Big Mike's draftsmanship. The same hand that had carved the wooden spoon from black walnut. The same spatial intelligence that had organized the kitchen for 4 decades. The map showed the garden. It showed the root cellar. And it showed something beneath the root cellar that was not pickles. A secondary seed vault. Climate-controlled. Installed in 1987 and maintained in secret ever since. The source compound was not extinct. It had never been extinct. Big Mike Washington had been growing it in South Philadelphia for 39 years, 20 feet from where his daughter stirred his gravy every morning, hiding the most valuable botanical specimen on Earth inside a root cellar he had told her was full of pickles. 9 minutes. "We need a split," Tae-Min said. He was using the voice he used when he had calculated all available options and selected the least terrible one. "2 of us go back for the seed vault. One of us stays here with the catalyst and finishes copying the compound synthesis notes." He looked at Naomi, then at Cho Yeon. "One of us needs to intercept Jun-Ho before he reaches the door. Give the others time." That would be you, Cho Yeon said. It was not a question. That would be me, Tae-Min agreed. Naomi stood up from the bench stool. No, she said. Both of them looked at her. He is your cousin, she said to Tae-Min, which means he will negotiate with you. He will spend time trying to turn you. He won't do that with me. She picked up the spice tin. She looked at Cho Yeon. How much of his mixture do we have left? Cho Yeon considered the tin. Enough for one more deployment. Possibly two if the space is confined. The passage is very confined, Naomi said. Tae-Min opened his mouth. Naomi looked at him with an expression that closed it again, not unkindly, but with the absolute finality of someone who has spent her entire life being underestimated in exactly the way he was about to underestimate her now, and who has run entirely out of patience for it. You stay, she said. You finish copying the synthesis notes. You know the chemical language. I don't. She looked at Cho Yeon. Come with me. You know these passages. I know what to do in a confined space with limited visibility and a spice tin. She picked up the lantern. We have 9 minutes. Let's not use them standing here. Cho Yeon looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up her tool roll from the bench, tucked it back in her jacket, and walked to the door. She did not look at Tae-Min. She did not ask for permission or confirmation or the particular kind of male reassurance that neither of them needed. She simply moved, and Naomi moved with her, and the door closed behind them with the soft, definitive sound of two women who have decided. Tae-Min stood alone in the laboratory with the ledger and the catalyst compound and 8 minutes and 40 seconds on his watch, and he did what he had been trained to do his entire life. He got to work. The synthesis notes were dense, 3 columns of notation per page, the kind of technical shorthand that only makes sense if you already know the language it is written in, and Tae-Min did know it, had learned it at 14 years old sitting outside his grandfather's laboratory in Seoul, listening through a cracked door to conversations he was not supposed to hear. He photographed every page with the methodical speed of someone who has spent 20 years memorizing things under time pressure. 41 pages. 6 minutes. With 2 minutes remaining, he did something that was not part of any plan anyone had discussed. He opened the refrigerated storage unit and removed the catalyst compound. He held it up to the work lamplight and looked at the amber liquid inside the sealed glass container. He thought about his grandmother's hands, the same hands that had written every label on every container in this room, and what it had cost those hands to keep this secret for 30 years while the man who had stolen it became one of the most powerful figures in Korean industrial history. He thought about what his grandfather had said to him when he was 12 years old, the first time he had brought Tae-Min into a business meeting as the family translator. A man who controls the language controls the room. He had spent 20 years believing that was wisdom. He understood now that it was a confession. He put the catalyst compound in his jacket pocket. Then he took out his phone and made a call to the one person in Seoul who had been waiting for this call for 15 years, his grandmother's lawyer, a woman named Baek Jisoo, who had kept Park Soon-hee's original affidavit in a sealed deposit box in a bank in Incheon since 2009, under instructions not to open it until Tae-Min called with a specific forward phrase. "The bridge holds always," Tae-Min said into the phone. He heard the lawyer exhale. Then he heard the sound of a deposit box being opened for the first time in 16 years. He was still on the phone when the work lamps flickered, then went out, then came back on at half power, running on a backup generator, which meant that something had happened in the passage outside, something that had drawn enough power from the main line to trigger the backup switch. He knew what it was. He had seen it twice now. The white-orange light of his grandmother's formula deployed as an emergency measure in a confined space by a woman who had inherited her father's gift for understanding exactly what a thing was for. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Naomi came through first, singed slightly at the left eyebrow, moving with the brisk, purposeful energy of someone who has just done something extremely effective and is ready to do the next thing. Cho Yeon came through behind her, pulling the door shut and engaging 2 of the 3 locks from inside. "Jun-Ho," Tae-Min said. "Contained," Naomi said. She looked at his jacket pocket where the outline of the glass container was visible. She looked at his phone still open in his other hand. She looked at his expression, which was doing the thing it did when something had shifted internally. The very slight realignment of the jaw, the millimeter of difference in how he held his shoulders. "What did you do?" she asked. "I made a call," he said. 16 years ago, my grandmother gave a sealed affidavit to a lawyer in Incheon. Original co-authorship documentation. Signed, notarized, predating my grandfather's patent by 19 months. He held up the phone. Baek Jisoo is filing it with the Korean Intellectual Property Office in approximately 40 minutes. By the time my grandfather's people realize what has happened, the filing will already be in a public record. The laboratory was quiet around them. The backup generator hummed its low, steady hum. The labeled containers on the benches held their amber and pale contents in the half-light. Cho Yeon spoke first. "There is still the matter of the seed vault," she said. "We cannot file a full restitution claim without the living botanical specimen. The affidavit establishes co-authorship. The catalyst compound proves the formula exists. But without the source plant, we cannot demonstrate ongoing viability, and the patent challenge will stall in litigation for 20 years. "The root cellar," Naomi said. "The root cellar," Cho Yeon confirmed. They looked at each other across the laboratory. The three of them, in the amber half-light beneath the DMZ, each holding one piece of something that only worked when all three pieces were together. Which was, Naomi thought, exactly how her father had designed it. Not out of complexity for its own sake, but because he had understood something about the nature of inheritance that had nothing to do with patents or formulas or vaults. You could not steal it if it required all three of them to use it. Getting back to Philadelphia in 48 hours was not the problem. The problem was getting back to Philadelphia in 48 hours without Jun-Ho's grandfather knowing they were coming, without the seed vault being destroyed before they reached it, and without Malik, whose location and allegiance were still unresolved questions sitting at the back of Naomi's mind like a pot left on a burner she hadn't turned off. Tae-Min arranged the flight through Baek Jisoo's office. Not a commercial flight. A private arrangement through a freight company that his grandmother had used for 30 years to move laboratory equipment between Seoul and Philadelphia without customs documentation that might alert the wrong people. The irony that his grandfather's own smuggling infrastructure was now being used to dismantle his grandfather's empire was not lost on Tae-Min. He noted it quietly and said nothing because there was nothing useful to add to it. They were in the air within 6 hours of leaving the laboratory. Cho Yeon had never been on a plane before. She did not say this. Naomi figured it out from the way she held the armrest during takeoff. Not with fear exactly, but with the careful, cataloging attention of someone experiencing something for the first time and filing every detail of it away. Naomi had grown up watching her father do the same thing whenever he encountered something new. This complete, unhurried registration of experience, as if the world were a laboratory and everything in it deserved the same quality of attention. She thought about telling Cho Yeon this. She decided it could wait. There was going to be time, she told herself. There was going to be a great deal of time for all the conversations that 30 years of separation had accumulated between them, and she was not going to rush any of them by forcing them into the pressurized cabin of a freight flight over the Pacific. Instead, she watched the ocean. She thought about the root cellar. She thought about being 7 years old and watching her father pour a concrete floor in the garden while she handed him tools from a red bucket, and how he had told her the root cellar was for Pickles, and how she had believed him completely because he was her father and she was 7 and the world was still the size of Baltimore Avenue and 52nd Street. She thought about what it meant to hide something in plain sight for 39 years. Not out of deception, or not only out of deception, but out of the specific, patient love of someone who knows that the people he is protecting are not ready yet for the full weight of what they're going to be asked to carry. He had kept it small for her. He had kept it manageable. He had kept it a root cellar full of pickles until the moment she was ready for it to be something else. She pressed her forehead against the cold window, and she let herself cry. Not for what had been taken, not for what had been burned. She cried for her father, for the specific magnitude of what he had done and what it had cost him and how he had done it anyway, every single day, without asking anyone to notice or to know. Cho Yeon looked up from her book. She didn't say anything. She reached across the aisle and placed her hand over Naomi's on the armrest. Her hand was steady, the way hands are steady when they have already survived the thing they feared most. Tae-Min, on the other side of Naomi, was asleep. His head was tilted slightly toward the window. The charred ledger was on his lap. His hand had fallen open beside it, palm up, the way hands fall when the body finally releases the grip it has been holding for too long. He looked younger asleep. He looked like someone who had spent so many years being the person who hears everything and says nothing, that his face had learned to carry the weight of it even in repose, and sleep was the only time it put the weight down. Naomi looked at him for a long time. She thought about bridges. She thought about what it takes to build one. Not the engineering of it, not the materials and the load calculations, but the prior decision, the one that has to happen before any of the building can begin. The decision that the distance between two places is worth crossing. That what is on the other side is worth the exposure of the span. Her father had made that decision in 1992 in front of a burning grocery store in Los Angeles. Park Soon-hee had made it with him, and they had spent the next 30 years building the bridge one quiet, stubborn, invisible act at a time, hiding in gravy and gardens and a root cellar full of pickles, until the day their children were ready to walk across it. The plane began its descent into Philadelphia. Below them, the city resolved out of the dark in its familiar grid of orange streetlight and black river. And Naomi Washington looked at it from 37,000 feet and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not the grief of return, not the complicated weight of coming back to a place that had burned while she was gone. What she felt was simpler than that and larger than that, and it took her a moment to find the word for it. She felt ready. The root cellar was intact. Jun-Ho's men had burned the restaurant and the kitchen and the dining room and the front garden, but they had not found the cellar entrance because her father had built it in 1987 and hidden the door under 39 years of ivy that he had planted specifically for this purpose and tended with the same quiet intentionality with which he had tended everything else. The ivy had burned at the surface. The door beneath it was untouched. Naomi opened it with a key she had carried on her keyring for 20 years without ever knowing what it was for. Her father had put it there when she was 16, telling her it was a spare for the back office. And she had never questioned it because it was her father and she trusted him, and some trusts are so deep and so old that they don't require explanation. They simply exist the way roots exist, below the surface, holding everything up. Inside the root cellar, under a climate-controlled glass enclosure that hummed with the same low frequency as the backup generator in the laboratory beneath the DMZ. 39 years of her father's careful, stubborn, magnificent defiance grew in the amber glow of a grow lamp that had never once been turned off. Not Pickles, never Pickles, the most valuable botanical specimen on Earth, alive and flowering, exactly where Big Mike Washington had left it, waiting for the day his daughter came home, ready to know what she was holding. Cho Yeon knelt beside the enclosure and opened her tool roll. Her hands were steady. Tae-Min stood at the cellar entrance, keeping watch, his phone open to Baek Jisu's number. The patent filing already 30 minutes into the public record and spreading through the Korean legal system with the unstoppable momentum of something that has been true for 30 years and is only now being permitted to say so. Naomi stood in the middle of the root cellar her father had built when she was 7 years old and looked at the plant that had been growing beneath her feet her entire life and thought about gravy, about the specific depth of color it had always carried, about the customers who had been trying to describe it for 40 years and never quite finding the word, about the way her father had smiled every time someone tried, not with pride exactly, but with something quieter and more private than pride. He had known. Every single day, he had known what was in the pot, and what was in the garden, and what was in the bottom drawer, and what was in the root cellar. And he had carried all of it alone for 30 years. And he had done it because the bridge was not finished yet, and someone had to hold the middle of it until the children were ready to walk from both ends. The bridge, as it turned out, had never needed the towers. It had been holding itself up all along. And now, right now, in this root cellar in South Philadelphia, while a patent filing moved through the Korean legal system, and Jun-Ho Han sat zip-tied to a pipe in a sewer beneath the DMZ, reading 4 words written in his grandfather's stolen formula on a stone wall. The bridge was complete. 3 keys, 3 worlds, 1 inheritance, and it belonged, finally, entirely, and irrevocably, to the people it had always been meant for. Now, if you made it to the end of part 2, you already know that this story is not finished. The patent filing is in the public record, but Jun-Ho's grandfather has not responded yet. Malik's full story has not been told. The seed vault is secured, but the world above ground does not know it exists yet. And Tae-Min Han is standing at the entrance to a root cellar in South Philadelphia, looking at two women who are his family in ways that no legal document will ever fully capture, holding a phone with a lawyer on the other end. And he has not yet said the thing he's been building towards saying since the moment he laid a rusted key on a 4 mica counter and told a stranger they had 10 minutes. Part 3 is coming, and it is going to burn brighter than anything that came before it. So here's what you do right now. Subscribe to Sarangi&Soul if you have not already done it. Hit the notification bell because part 3 drops without warning, and the people who are not subscribed are going to find out about it in someone else's comment section 3 days after everyone else has already lost their minds over it. Scroll down to the comments right now and tell me one thing. Was Malik a traitor, or was he running a play the whole time? Because that bruise on his face in the FaceTime call was doing a lot of work, and I want to know if he caught it. Drop your theory below. Like this video, if the root cellar reveal broke something open in you. Share it with one person who needs a story that sounds like nothing they have ever heard before. And if you're new to Sarangi&Soul, welcome. You found us at exactly the right moment. The bridge between Seoul and Philly is complete. But the war for the inheritance has only just moved above ground. Part 3, coming soon. We are nowhere near done.